In 2010, two movies came out within 4 months of each other that detailed an unusual premise, especially for an animated movie, which was the story of the villain turning into the hero. Now, at the time, Despicable Me was far and away hailed as the better movie, while Megamind was considered good but a little weird. However, over time opinions have changed, with Megamind developing a cult following due in part to it holding up extremely well as a superhero parody in arguably that genre's golden age, while everybody started getting sick of the little yellow minion characters after Despicable Me became Illumination's flagship franchise. But even with all of that, one question still remains to be answered. Is one movie actually better than the other? And today, while trying to be as fair and impartial as possible, I'm going to try and answer that question. But I would just like to warn all of you that there will be spoilers for both movies ahead, so if you haven't seen either of them yet but plan to, you should probably come back to this video another day. You have been warned. Okay, so to start off simply, both movies do have a rather similar setup, where a man who's a bad guy and proud of it has to contend with an unexpected development in their master plans, and by the end of the movie find themselves reforming their evil ways and become a much better person, and the hero of the story instead. But there is one major difference here, which is that Megamind, as I've discussed at length in other videos, doesn't actually appear to be a genuinely bad person and is just playing the role of a bad guy. Gru, while most definitely not pure evil, appears to be much more of a genuinely bad person at first. Sure, he's a good boss to his minions and Dr. Nefario, but he's a pretty big jerk to everybody else unless he wants something from them, and doesn't appear to be very saddened at the thought that he just caused the death of a little girl, accidentally, yes, but he still seems alarmingly unbothered by it. In other words, one movie has a main character who's a genuine bad guy that decides to reform, while the other is a man who realizes that he's tired of playing the thankless role of the villain. Really, where the movies are closer is in the fact that both villains have minion characters that are referred to by that specific name. And though they are villainous henchmen, they're actually some of the nicest characters in their respective movies. But, of course, if I were to state all the differences between the little yellow guys and the fish piloting a gorilla suit, we'd be here all day. So let's just say that beyond that, they don't have very much in common. Minion doesn't even share that much with Dr. Nefario, beyond them both trying to persuade their bosses back to villainy for their own good when they think they're falling off the rails. And even then, Nefario does a much better job of doing that than Minion does, though it's not for lack of trying on his part. And even the true villains of their respective movies are basically complete opposites when you stop and look at it. Titan is supposed to be a hero and descends into villainy, while Vector is the villain that Gru frankly wishes he could be. And also, at first it looks like Hal Stewart might be a smart nerdy type who, after Megamind straightens him out on a few things, might make for the perfect hero, and turns out to have been a completely selfish idiot the whole time. While Vector, by contrast, appears as an annoying, over-enthusiastic, and slightly incompetent kid at first, but then turns out to not only be a genius, capable of stealing a frickin' pyramid, but also turns out to be an extremely credible threat for Gru. And even how they're defeated is completely different, because Megamind defeats Titan directly by draining him of his powers, while Gru never actually confronts Vector head on and is instead taken out by the rapidly growing Moon. Now, both movies also involve girls being a major part of why the villain reforms, but even then there's a huge difference. Because in Megamind, it's the romantic love of an adult woman that changes him, while in Despicable Me, it's three little girls Gru has to adopt as part of his scheme that he later comes to love like a father. To put it simply, it's two completely different types of love from two completely different kinds of girls. Now, sure, Gru would get his own love interest in the sequel, but we're only talking about the original movie exclusively in this case. And that ties in perfectly to the message behind both movies as well. In Despicable Me, it's a simple message about how sometimes love can redeem even the seemingly most evil of people, while in Megamind, the moral is that we all have free will and that we aren't bound by destiny to be what we must, and that we can choose our own path instead. And though both those morals do apply to the other movie to a lesser degree, in the end you have to admit those are pretty different messages for movies that at first glance appear to be very similar. And that's the thing. Though at first glance the movies appear to have a lot in common, in actuality they don't. When you really look at it, Despicable Me is the more conventional movie about a genuine villain belonging to a bad guy organization trying to prove his worth, and in the process finds himself growing to love the girls he had to have as part of that plan a little too much. While Megamind, which is very famous for being extremely subversive, is definitely a lot weirder, but also takes a very different approach to telling its story. Megamind is a character study of a supervillain who's a bad guy in name only, and the lengths he'll go to in order to feel he has a purpose, as well as come to terms with the fact that he could make for a pretty good hero if everybody, including himself, would just give him the chance. To put it another way, Megamind is a more adult movie in nature, tackling themes and questions for a more mature audience, while Despicable Me is aimed squarely at kids, mostly trying to be funny while also imparting a little message that people aren't always as bad as they seem. Okay, so to put it all simply, it's impossible to say if one movie is better over the other as a villain becomes the hero story goes, because both movies go about telling that story in completely different ways. Despicable Me is a much more traditional kids movie, while Megamind is absolutely bent on subverting everything the superhero genre is known for, and to pretty good results at that. So while they both have a very similar starting point, in the end that's about all both movies have in common, except for their humor. But they're CGI PG rated movies. Them being funny is as much a given as there being snow by February in Alaska or Siberia. But the point is, both succeeded in telling the stories they wanted to tell, and considering how different those stories were, it's honestly impossible to say if one was better than the other. They were both good movies and told their respective stories really well. And that's a pretty important thing to remember. Storytelling comes in many different forms, so just because two movies appear to have a similar premise, that does not guarantee by any means that they'll be similar in execution. Alright, that pretty much covers everything. So now I want you to tell me, do you believe Despicable Me and Megamind are actually very different movies, despite their similar premise? Or do you still believe that they have a lot in common and that one is definitely better than the other? Please let me know in the comments. And remember, you don't have to agree with what I said in this video. You can most definitely feel any way about this subject that you want to. And thank you all for watching. It is all greatly appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.